demands and having unreasonable expectations. With regards to the Democrats and their posture, Gabe, I completely understand. And it is true that Speaker McCarthy has not been, at least in his public expressions, the most welcoming and bipartisan of House speakers. Now, I will say privately, Speaker McCarthy, at least during the time I served, did have strong relationships across the aisle, but that has likely changed as he moved into the ultimate leadership position. But I can certainly understand why Democrats wouldn't want to give him a lifeline at this point. I do hope that at some point after this vote, Democrats are willing to work with centrist Republicans, with reasonable Republicans, to find a better way forward for this institution, to help stabilize this institution and allow it to deliver for the American people.
As we look at these live pictures, we're getting to potentially end of this vote here, short time away. Carlos, you talked about your time in the House and how, you know, there was always factions within the Republican Party, but ever to this point, this is unprecedented that we've gotten so far in this motion to vacate.
Well, Gabe, yes and no. I mean, in 2015, and Brendan can speak to this, the only reason that John Boehner had the votes to become Speaker is because there was a funeral service for a Democrat who had passed away, and a lot of Democrats were not in the chamber that day. If the Democrats had been there, I think it would have been very difficult for John Boehner to get the necessary votes to become Speaker. John Boehner was also threatened with this motion to vacate. It was filed by Mark Meadows and others. Thomas Massey mentioned today during his floor speech that he was one of the co-authors, the original co-authors of that motion. So this is unfolding in a very dramatic way today, Gabe, but this has been in the making for many years.
Former Congressman Carlos Cabello, thank you so much for joining us. I want to turn here to our panel. As we're watching this, 204 yes votes at this point for the motion to vacate. We're nearing that threshold. Stephen, as you look at this, and what we just heard from Congressman Colony, that Democrats decided, hey, this isn't worth it. We can't go along with throwing McCarthy a lifeline. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised by what Congressman Connolly said. Makes sense for Democrats. I do think it was interesting what former Congressman Cabello said, in that these groups, these factions have existed for a long time. The difference is Republicans have a slim majority right now. There's no room to maneuver. You can't placate people like Matt Gaetz on the one hand and Congressman Valadao on the other. They want different things. Matt Gaetz is a nihilist. He wants to stop the process. He wants to blow it up, and he wants to be on TV. Congressman Valadao, as he said in his interview with you, would like to work across the aisle, would like to accomplish things. He comes from a competitive district in California, and he's here to govern. Matt Gaetz is a grifter.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi, though, had a thin majority as well. This never happened under Speaker Pelosi.
Different, I mean, certainly different dynamics among Democrats. They have their progressive wing, but the progressive wing usually comes to some accommodation with the Democratic leadership. And I think the incentive structure that it exists for Republicans, particularly Republicans who want to spend their time on television or talking to talk radio people or right-wing podcasts, doesn't quite exist the same way on the Democratic side.
And as we get to 212 yes votes, we are nearing a final vote here. Doug,
Williams of New York.
As we wait here for this final vote, who emerges here? Steve Scalise?
I don't have a clue who emerges. Look, I think one of the things that I'm assuming is I think we should all be getting a little tired of the historic moments that this Republican leadership is continuing to give us year after year, month after month. Whether it's a former president who's been indicted 4 times, impeached twice, whether it is the historic vote on the speaker earlier or this vote today, it's time to govern. The one thing I would talk about with Speaker Pelosi, Democrats have learned to govern a little bit. They don't always like what they see, but they've really started to try to figure out ways to govern and act in a way that you can move this country forward. And I think that's the difference with what you're seeing among the various factions in the Republican Party. They are fine with blowing things up rather than trying to govern if to get their way. I don't know who emerges from this. I think Democrats are going to sit back and watch and let let Republicans decide, and hopefully they will put someone forward who will be able to work with Democrats, but also keep his word or her word with Democrats as well. And I think that that's the key.
And I want to look at those live pictures. Again, we're at 2:15. We appear to have reached the number of votes that oust Speaker McCarthy, but again, not official until it's actually gavelled in. Deepa, I want to turn to you. Is this idea that there could be some outreach to moderate Republicans, is that really realistic at this point? If they
in this vote?
Yeah, or not in this vote. Not in this vote. Going forward, this idea that there could be, some power sharing agreement. And actually, let's listen in right now to this live.
Nay.
Okay, we've got Bush is next.
Bush.
Right,
Bush.
okay, Kamek's next.
Kamek. Nay.
This is 8. Hang on. Okay, I've got Carter of Texas next.
Carter of Texas. Carter of Texas.
And what's happening right now for our viewers, there appear to be some stragglers that they're going through. Again, the vote has not been gavelled in, but it appears that that they do have enough votes to oust Speaker McCarthy. And as we wait for that final vote to be gavelled, Deepa,
Tony Gonzalez.
I was asking you that question. Is there any? Is it realistic to think that there could be some sort of power sharing agreement between Democrats and moderate Republicans here, or is that just a pipe dream?
Yeah, it's hard to say at this point, but as we've been talking about, I mean, and as we've seen in this vote that's ongoing right now, Democrats have remained a united front. And we're not headed into, a slow season here. We've got a 45-day CR until the government potentially could shut down again. We've got Ukraine aid that needs to be decided on. I mean, there are a number of issues here where it would probably benefit Democrats to remain in a united front. And so, like we said earlier, it's really hard to say what happens next when this vote officially clears and we have an idea of what happens potentially next if they start voting on, who could be the next speaker now. A lot of things are still unclear, but it's hard to say if that kind of a coalition would really be successful or even beneficial to Democrats at this point.
And again, as we wait for the final vote being gavelled in, Stephen, what do you see here as the future for this sharply divided Republican Party?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see more of this. Same. We're going to get more of this. I mean, there will be set aside legislation. I think we're in all likelihood for these kinds of scrapes among Republicans. Nobody's going to leave this satisfied. If Matt Gaetz gets a scalp, he's not going to leave this and think this is a win, a real win for him. He's going to want to continue to be on air. He's going to want to continue to be making this case. There is a part of the Republican Party, the ones who are opposing McCarthy here, who they win by losing. Losing is not a negative for them. They're not trying generally to legislate. Some of them are conservative. Some of them would like limited government. But they win by losing and by getting attention. So as long as that's the incentive, that's likely to continue.
And Stephen, as we want to look at these live pictures now, again, we're waiting for this vote to become official. Let's take a listen to what's going on in the U.S. House of Representatives. And again, we're waiting for that final gavel. All the votes are in. They're waiting to see if anyone will change their vote. And we could be about to hear that Speaker McCarthy has been ousted as Speaker of the House of Representatives. What a historic moment we could be witnessing right now. Let's keep listening.
Have you got the tally? On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 210. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're coming on the air with breaking news and a major shift in power on Capitol Hill. The House just voted to remove Speaker Kevin McCarthy from his post in a high-stakes vote just now on the House floor. It comes after McCarthy, the top Republican, cut a deal with Democrats to avert a government shutdown over the weekend that angered some in his own party whose demands were dropped in the negotiations. It happened because one of those Republicans, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, introduced the resolution to remove McCarthy just last night. And it's the first time this process has ever successfully removed a House Speaker in American history. Let's go right now to senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haig. Garrett, what happens now?
Well, Lester, a speakership that began in historic fashion less than a year ago now ends in historic fashion, with Kevin McCarthy the first speaker to ever be removed from that position by a vote on the floor. What we'll see in the immediate term is the naming of a speaker pro tem, a temporary speaker, a caretaker speaker who will lead the House through the next election to replace Kevin McCarthy and select someone else to be second in line for the presidency. This could be a contentious process as well. The speaker lost 8 Republican votes, along with every Democrat voting to vacate the chair. Who could succeed him in this climate right now? Very much an open question. The House will be largely paralyzed until that question can be answered, Lester.
Is there a timeline for them to get this done?
Lester, we are in uncharted territory. It's cliche to say, but we have never been in this position before in the United States Congress. The House will move quickly. This Speaker pro tem idea is actually a new post 9/11 change to ensure continuity of government. So we are very much in uncharted territory, but it is every indication that the House, Republicans still control it, will want to move quickly to name someone as their leader so they can continue the business of governing. Remember, they only have some 40-odd days to fund the government on a longer-term basis after that deal from over the weekend.
All right, Garrett, we'll let you continue to work the story. Let me turn to our Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker. Garrett put it pretty well, uncharted territory right now. So what does this mean going forward in terms of the mechanism of government? And that other question, who would want this job now?
Well, that is the big question, and you saw Representative Patrick McHenry, who was standing there. He's a real ally of Speaker McCarthy. He's one of the names that has been floated about. But I think big picture, Lester, it really highlights the deep divisions within the Republican Party right now. The fact that this is happening after that showdown over trying to keep the government open, and the question becomes, what does happen next? Look, I've been talking to Republicans who are expressing frustration about what they're seeing on Capitol Hill. The fact that this is going on against the backdrop of 2024. They say, look, to the point that Garrett was just making, they only have a matter of days to try to get another deal to keep the government open. Moderate Republicans want to see deep spending cuts. They say all of this that's occurring right now on Capitol Hill is taking attention away from the critical work that needs to be done in that regard. Think about our polling, Lester, if you want to pull back the curtain just a little bit more. It shows Republicans getting high marks on things like the economy. And I think the question and the concern within the Republican Party is, will this type of activity on Capitol Hill, what GOP candidate Mike Pence has described as chaos, by the way, today, will that take away from those high marks that they are getting? And from the perspective of the voters, they are looking at a series of somewhat chaotic events. The standoff over the debt ceiling, the near government shutdown, the GOP frontrunner who's facing 4 indictments. So the big question question, could this mar them heading into 2024?
All right, Kristen, thank you. For more, let's bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Hallie, mentioned in hearing your thoughts about the way forward and what this symbolizes for future speakers.
Well, right now, let's do short-term, long-term, Lester, because right now the word that comes to mind is essentially paralysis, because that is what is happening in the House of Representatives until this gets sorted out. Garrett sort of made a joke, and I smiled a bit, uncharted territory. Get ready to hear those two words a heck of a lot over the course of the next several days, weeks, who knows how long, because that is where we are. We don't know if now former Speaker Kevin McCarthy is going to try to run for the speakership again. We know it took him 15 votes to get it the first time. Might he try to throw his hat in the ring? Will there be other names, as you've heard described, who come forward on this part? And keep in mind the sheer drama politically of what we just saw, Lester, inside the Beltway, like we just don't see, right? It says something about our institutions. It says something about what the new normal is right now on Capitol Hill in Congress. There was an opportunity there. There was a chance that Democrats could have maybe bailed out Kevin McCarthy even, and they made the decision, that party did, that they were going to let Kevin McCarthy sleep in the bed that he made. And why do I say that? Because the deal that got Kevin McCarthy the speakership in the first place was this, that it only would take one vote to bring up this motion, very procedural thing, to potentially kick him out of office. From the very beginning, almost a year ago now, not even a year ago, the question had really not been if somebody would try to use that motion to kick him out. It was a function of when. Well, we now know the when piece of it after this deal to avoid a shutdown essentially was struck over the weekend. It could have been any number of things, and I would say that's also just the tip of the iceberg for some of these ultra-conservative Republicans who have long not wanted to see McCarthy in the speakership. So that's the short-term thing. As we're looking at these extraordinary images, the Speaker pro tem of the House of Representatives running things, recess now as Republicans are scrambling to figure out a way forward. And keep in mind those speeches that we saw, Lester, right? It was Republican versus Republican. This was not something that involved sort of both sides in the aisle, as we often talk about and often hear about here in Washington. This is, I think, the Republican ideological fight, the battle royale that is unfolding in that party writ large in several ways here. Longer term wise, listen, I think we've got to look at the way that American people view the institution here. There is a process, and you've heard a lot about from McCarthy allies about this process essentially being undermined, and you heard anger, fiery anger from some of McCarthy's allies on the floor that, you know, this is political gamesmanship. The question that perhaps those like Congressman Gates are doing this to raise money, to raise their profiles, if you will. So all of it, let me go back to sort of where we started here. Uncharted territory, Lester, no kidding. That's where we are, and that's where we're going to be for a bit.
Yeah, we're seeing the pictures of the major players. Matt Gaetz, who was the one that pulled the political trigger on this. He was talking to reporters on Capitol Hill. We'll hear more from him, I suspect. Let me bring in...
Well, you know, the stages of grief, I think, are in progress right now.
Let's listen to a little of this.
Colleagues, I think there was a stage of denial, and I've certainly experienced a good amount of their anger, and now we appear to be headed toward bargaining. I think the world of Steve Scalise. I think he'd make a phenomenal speaker.
Has anyone spoken to you? We've got less than 45.
I'm afraid of $33 trillion in debt crushing the working people in my district. I'm afraid of the dollar losing its status as the global reserve currency. If they want to expel me, let me know when they have the vote.
Has anyone talked about that with you?
5 days left before we've got less than 45 days left.
All right, we're listening to Matt Gaetz again. He pulled the political trigger, started the mechanism that led to today's ouster of the now outgoing
We've heard you say you're a fighter so many times.
Leader.
You said you would win. The fight continues.
He's going to walk past cameras, waiting to see if Kevin McCarthy was going to make any comments as he leaves the chamber. Matt Gaetz continue to talk. Let me bring in Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, what's the view from the White House on all this?
The West Wing, no indication whether or not President Biden is watching the events as they've been taking place on Capitol Hill. But I can tell you that I saw some of his senior aides glued to their televisions watching what's going on right here. The White House is really casting this as a split screen moment, effectively saying that while President Biden is focused on delivering for the American people, the extreme, in their words, House Republicans are effectively in disarray right now. The president today announcing what is a historic moment in its own right, that for the first time in its 60-year history, Medicare would be negotiating with 10 drug manufacturers to try to bring down prices for things like Eliquis and all sorts of different prescription drugs that many Americans are familiar with right now, while the Republicans are fighting among themselves. I'm struck as we watch what's taking place on the Hill, Lester, by a big headline only a matter of maybe a decade ago. They celebrated, Republicans did, the new generation of conservative leaders, the young guns as they were described, Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, and Kevin McCarthy. Paul Ryan no longer in Congress. Eric Cantor booted as well. Kevin McCarthy, now a historic figure, becoming the first House Speaker to lose his position by a vote of this kind. So just another example of how, at least in the eyes of the White House, and frankly, for anybody watching right now, the real challenges continue to exist for this Republican Party that has been feuding among itself and obviously Donald Trump's role in all of this. Donald Trump, who you'll remember only a matter of a couple weeks ago was saying that House Republicans should shut down the government if they couldn't get the deal that they wanted. Well, the shutdown was averted. Kevin McCarthy made sure that didn't happen, but ultimately it cost him his job, Lester.
All right, Peter Alexander at the White House. Thank you. Let me go back to our senior Capitol Hill correspondent, Garrett Haake. Garrett, it's not lost on anyone that Democrats were in a position to save McCarthy's job, and they made the collective decision not to. What's the blowback, potential blowback, the effect on Democrats?
Well, Lester, we'll see where this lands when a new speaker is ultimately chosen, but Democrats felt like they owed Kevin McCarthy nothing, and frankly, he made no effort to even approach them in any serious manner to save his speakership. In fact, in this caucus meeting Democrats held this morning, where they discussed and debated how they would respond to this motion, the Democratic leaders played a video of McCarthy on the Sunday shows this weekend attacking Democrats and suggesting it was Democrats who drove the country to the edge of a government shutdown this week, knowing full well that he would need those Democratic votes if he wanted to remain in power. For some Democratic lawmakers, that was a last straw. They never trusted Kevin McCarthy, not based on any of his recent behavior, his role in the negotiating of the debt ceiling deal, for example, that he immediately backed away from, but even going back farther than that, his actions after January 6th, where he condemned Donald Trump on the floor, then traveled to Mar-a-Lago to court his support, where he undercut a bipartisan commission to investigate the 6th that he himself had asked to be created. Democrats felt like this was not a choice between the lesser of two evils. This was someone who was basically in league with the same forces who had now turned against him. And so there wasn't really much of a choice or a decision to be made here. McCarthy and the speakership was Republicans' problem, and Democrats would vote as a bloc to basically say, we don't want this guy. Solve your own problem, Republicans. That's the choice they've made, and we'll see how that plays out in the longer term when a new speaker is chosen, Lester.
Yeah, was it ever clear the number and what kind of deals that were made for him to get the job in the first place?
This has always been a question, Lester, and perhaps we'll get a better answer now that he is no longer the speaker. The conservative faction of House Republicans said that a variety of deals were made, including placing some of their members on the Rules Committee, which controls what bills come to the floor, that spending bills, for example, like the ones we've been debating over the last couple of months, would be brought up on an individual basis rather than in a big group all before Christmas, as is often the case. But there were also conservative members who said there were other deals that were made, side deals on various policy positions or guaranteeing votes on various issues. McCarthy never formally confirmed any of that publicly. No paper was ever produced to confirm those deals. But it's that lack of trust that I think contributed to the position McCarthy's in now. I think about someone like Nancy Mace, who is a member who has been at times allied with McCarthy, but who's repeatedly said how frustrated she was that she couldn't count on him to keep his word to her. She was a surprise yes vote to replace McCarthy today.
And I assume there's great pressure, obviously, to get things worked out and back on track as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great ironies of all this, Lester, is whoever the new speaker is, and whether they're chosen today or a week from now or 3 weeks from now, will have to deal with all the same problems this speaker did. I just interviewed one of the House Republicans who voted against McCarthy, who was explaining to me his frustration with the mounting debt in this country and the spending bills being as large as they are. And I asked him, probably not, but we have to try. So we could very much find ourselves in a similar position with a new speaker in the not too distant future, Lester.
Garrett Haake, thanks very much. That concludes our special report. Much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now. And I'll see you tonight with more on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day.